Imagine waking up one morning and realizing the thing the entire world trusted for nearly a century isn't trusted anymore. The US dollar has never just been American money. It has been the world's financial backbone. For decades, governments, banks, corporations, and even countries that politically oppose the United States have relied on it. Oil is bought in dollars. International trade is settled in dollars. Central banks store their reserves in dollars. When crises hit, investors run to the dollar for safety. That's not just economics, it's power. But what happens if that power starts slipping away? It's not suddenly like a movie explosion, but slowly, quietly, the way mountains erode. To understand what could happen if the dollar falls, you have to first understand why it ever rose this high. After World War II, the world needed stability. The United States had the strongest economy, the deepest financial markets, and political influence unlike anything seen before. The dollar became the anchor of the global economy. That gave America a privilege no other nation enjoyed. It could borrow endlessly, run massive deficits, print trillions, and still have the world willingly accept its currency. Countries went bankrupt, currencies collapsed, economies failed. But the dollar stood tall. But privilege always comes with consequences. When a currency is trusted globally, it must also remain responsible. It must inspire confidence, and confidence is fragile. Over time, massive debt, rising deficits, political instability, trade wars, financial crises, and global power shifts slowly start to test that trust. If the world begins thinking, maybe relying on one currency is risky, the journey toward a weaker dollar quietly begins. Now picture a world where demand for the dollar starts falling. Each dollar suddenly buys less. Imported goods become more expensive. Fuel costs rise, electronics cost more. Everyday living becomes harder, not because of shortages, but because the money in your hand isn't as powerful as it used to be. Inflation creeps in, not as a temporary spike, but as a structural reality. Life becomes costlier by design. Ironically, some American industries may benefit temporarily. A weaker dollar makes American products cheaper for the rest of the world, which can boost exports. Factories might see more demand. But while businesses feel relief, ordinary people feel pain. And that's just a weaker dollar. The real shock comes if the dollar begins losing its role as the world's main reserve currency. Today, nearly every central bank holds US dollars as their emergency safety vault. If they slowly start replacing dollars with other currencies, gold or digital alternatives, the results would be dramatic. The US government depends on foreign countries buying its bonds to fund spending. If those buyers disappear, borrowing becomes more expensive. Interest rates rise, loans become harder to afford. Debt becomes heavier. The American economy starts feeling something it hasn't felt in generations: real vulnerability. Global markets also begin to panic. The dollar is the unit the world uses to measure value. If that measuring stick becomes unstable, businesses hesitate. Investors hesitate. Trade becomes riskier. Countries scramble for alternatives, not because they hate the US, but because survival demands certainty. Meanwhile, other powers like China silently wait for their turn to influence global finance. The world doesn't collapse instantly. Instead, it shifts. Power redistributes. This wouldn't be the first time history sees such a change. Before the dollar ruled the world, the British pound did. But when Britain's economy weakened after wars and debts, the world slowly transitioned to the dollar. It didn't happen in a day. It happened step by step, exactly the same way it might happen again now. And the most dangerous part, ordinary people wouldn't realize it immediately. Life wouldn't suddenly stop. Planes wouldn't fall from the sky. Banks wouldn't shut down overnight. Instead, everything would just quietly become harder. Savings would lose power. Prices would creep higher. Stability would feel less permanent. Confidence would fade without people noticing the moment it disappeared. If the dollar truly begins to fall, it won't just be an American story. It will be a global story. Because when the world's anchor starts shaking, every ship in the ocean feels the waves. But here's the question no one really wants to face. What does the world actually look like the day the dollar finally isn't king anymore? It doesn't start with chaos. It starts with conversations. Quiet policy meetings in Europe. Strategic discussions in Asia. Oil producers talking behind closed doors. One country announces it will trade oil in another currency. Another country decides to reduce its dollar reserves. A third nation creates its own payment system to avoid the dollar completely. Nothing dramatic, no explosions. It's just a series of small decisions that slowly rewrite global finance. At first, America laughs it off. The dollar has faced challenges before. Critics have been predicting its downfall for 50 years. But this time something feels different. It's not one country making noise, it's many countries acting together. It's not emotionally, strategically. Because why should one nation's political decisions affect everyone else's economy? Why should sanctions, interest rates, and inflation in one country echo across the planet? Slowly, a new world begins to take shape. And this is where the shock truly begins for ordinary people. When fewer countries hold dollars, fewer countries need American bonds. That means the US government suddenly has to work harder to borrow money. Interest rates rise, not briefly, but permanently. Mortgages become more expensive. Business loans shrink. Government spending becomes harder. Projects slow down. Social programs struggle for funding. Suddenly, the most powerful nation on Earth has to start behaving like every other country. Imagine the impact on global trade. For decades, the dollar made business simple. A company in Africa trading with a company in Europe didn't need to trust each other's currency. They trusted the dollar in between. But when that neutral middle disappears, trust disappears with it. Trade becomes complicated. Deals take longer. Risk increases. Small countries suffer first, as developing nations, the ones already struggling to stabilize their economies, face the biggest storm. Currency volatility, price shocks, food inflation, fuel shortages. All because the world's financial anchor loosened. Meanwhile, inside America, something psychological begins to break. For generations, Americans grew up believing their currency was the safest in the world, their economy untouchable, their financial system unbreakable. But confidence is like glass. Once a crack appears, it spreads. People start questioning their savings. Investors start doubting the markets. Corporations begin looking outside America for stability. Money quietly leaves. And yet, strangely, the story isn't just about America losing. It's about power redistributing. Maybe a new reserve currency rises. Maybe it's a basket of currencies. Maybe it's digital. Maybe it's controlled by multiple countries instead of one. The world won't collapse. It will reorganize. But reorganizations are painful. History tells us every time a global financial leader falls, the world doesn't transition peacefully. It goes through turbulence. Sometimes even crisis. Look at Britain when it lost the pound's dominance. It didn't collapse overnight. Its standard of living slowly declined. Influence faded. Decisions it once dictated, it now had to negotiate. The US dollar falling would be the same story, just on a much larger scale. But here's the twist most people don't see coming. Even if the dollar weakens, even if its dominance fades, it may not disappear completely. Because the truth is, the world still needs a currency big enough, trusted enough, liquid enough to handle trillions of dollars of global trade. There is no perfect replacement. Not yet. So instead of a dramatic collapse, what's far more likely is a slow erosion. A world where the dollar still matters, but not the way it used to. Where America still has influence, but not control. Where power isn't centralized anymore. It's shared. And maybe that's both the danger and the hope. Danger, because a world without a single financial anchor is unstable, unpredictable, fragile. Hope, because for the first time in a century, no single nation would be able to shape the global economy entirely in its own image. So what happens if the US dollar falls? Life doesn't end. The world doesn't explode. But the silent assumptions humanity has lived under for decades begin to disappear. Prices behave differently. Power behaves differently. Wealth behaves differently. And the world slowly adjusts to a reality where America is not the unquestioned center of global money anymore. The truth is, nobody can say exactly when or how it happens. But history teaches one lesson clearly. No empire, no currency, no financial system remains dominant forever. The only constant in global power is that it eventually shifts. And if that shift is coming, the real question isn't what happens if the dollar falls. The real question is, when it does, will the world be ready?